Good morning. I'm Regina Broach. I want to talk to you today about listening for God's voice. I'm going to read to you from 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" As Christians, we talk about having a personal relationship with Jesus. We work on our prayer lives by reading books, following the newest prayer trend, or the advice of godly Christians. Our prayers often include praise and thanksgiving, and then a long list of problems to be solved. We close with another prayer of thanks for the answers to our prayers, the answers we haven't even seen yet. There's nothing wrong with that, except we often forget to listen for God's voice. The key word to look at here is the word relationship. We have relationships with friends and family and coworkers and others. The dynamics of each relationship are different. We aren't going to have the same levels of intimacy even among family members. There are some things we would discuss with our spouse that we wouldn't with our parents or children. If we stop talking to any of these people that we have relationships with, those relationships start to fade. It doesn't necessarily disappear, but it affects us less and less. There are friends that I have known for over 40 years that I haven't spoken to in several years. If I ran into my friend at the store, I would be glad to give them a hug and catch up on old times. They're still my friend, but except for the memories I have with them, we don't have much of a relationship. They don't have a big impact on my life. The same is true of God. If we don't spend time with Him, His impact on our lives decreases. How do we have a relationship with someone we can't see and we're not even sure we hear? Have you ever had random ideas or thoughts pop into your head? According to Freud's psychoanalytic theory, there are three distinct elements that affect our actions: the id, the ego, and the superego. The superego is often illustrated by cartoonists as the good angel on our shoulder telling us what is right and what is wrong. The id is the bad angel on the opposite side of the shoulder telling us to give in to our desires. The ego is the man in the middle who has to choose which voice to listen to. Satan would definitely prefer that we listen to his voice or anybody's voice besides God's. So how do we identify God's voice from our own desires or Satan's? God uses a variety of methods to speak to us. He walked in the garden with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day to talk to them. God spoke to Moses through the burning bush. He used judges, prophets, and other methods. He spoke to John and several of the prophets through dreams and visions. He sent messengers to Abram, Lot, and Mary. In 1 Kings, Elijah was weary and dejected. He had been the instrument God had used to demonstrate His will for the Israelites. Elijah spoke God's words of warning and prophecy to King Ahab. He had slain the prophets of Baal and had been very zealous for the Lord. Elijah knew God's power. God is the one who sent the fire down on Elijah's sacrifice, caused a drought, and then the deluge that ended that drought. Surely Elijah would expect for such a powerful God to manifest Himself in the mighty wind, the earthquake, or the fire like Moses' burning bush. Elijah was waiting and listening for God's voice, which he heard in the still small voice. Have you ever been in a store or restaurant and hear a voice that you recognized? The first time we meet someone, we may not learn their voice, but the more time we spend with them, the more likely we are to recognize their voice. Life can get very busy and hectic, and sometimes when God speaks, we might miss it if we don't practice listening for His voice. God can use several ways to talk to us, like I said before. There have been times when I've been troubled and praying about a particular matter, and then that song comes on the radio that deals with exactly what I've been frustrated with and praying about. But that's just a coincidence, right? Well, if you dismiss it as such, then you've not heard God speaking to you. He spoke, but you weren't listening. God can speak through coincidences. He can speak through impressions, audible words, quiet whispers, scripture, and other methods. We learn to hear Him through expecting to hear from Him. We weigh those thoughts and impressions against Scripture. We don't want to take Scripture out of context. We can't pick and choose which Scriptures we want to pay attention to and which ones we want to accept. Acts 13:22 tells us that God called David a man after His own heart. There is an underlying theme in the entirety of Scripture that shows us God's heart. And when we weigh what we think is His voice against those Scriptures, they're going to line up. If we want to hear from God, we have to be willing to hear what He says, even if it disagrees with what we want. We have to be open to Him and be actively listening for His voice. Put aside any hindrances, get away from distractions, and pray, expecting God to speak to you. You are important enough for God to talk to. David was a shepherd. Moses was a criminal with a speech impediment. Paul was a religious zealot and a killer. Gideon was a farmer. God speaks to nobodies and to somebodies. At least 6 times the Scriptures say, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." Are you listening? I brought you a sentence prayer. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.